This doesn't make sense to me and never has. The computer money. I don't even want to say the name of it.
So for a little bit of history, and I have to give you some foundation, not necessarily you specifically, but anybody who happens to see this, I'm going to give you the foundation. You have to understand the difference between a hard currency and a fiat or debt-based currency. The dollar is a fiat, actually it's worse, it's a debt-based currency. It's based upon debt. And in fact, even Ben Bernanke himself, Helicopter Ben himself, could not answer the question of what a dollar was when Ron Paul directly asked him to explain what a dollar was. His answer was a dollar is what a dollar will buy. It's a very slippery answer. But if we go back into just a tiny bit of history and understand that the hard currency aspect, which was traditionally gold. Why? Because it either weighed or it didn't. It's either pure or it's not, and you either have it or you don't, right? That's the definition of hard currency. In the case of the currency whose name we don't mention, it has the same basic properties, except that it is actually finite, and we know in advance what that number actually is. It's 21 million coin units. So we know what that number is. So unlike gold, of course, if you ask how much gold is there in the world, the correct answer is nobody knows, because we don't know. It is a mineral, and it is part of the earth, but we don't know how much gold is even above ground because it's highly fungible and private, which is nice. It's a little too fungible and a little too private for reasons I'll go into right now, and that goes into the banking aspect. A lot of people, of course, didn't want to transact in physical gold any longer because it is cumbersome. And of course, because it is fungible, it can be stolen. Once it's stolen, that's it. There's no way to prove that that gold was yours, right? Because it's just gold. So the idea is like, well, let's put our gold in a vault or in a bank and get claim checks or certificates. The problem is the people who print the certificates and the claim checks, and other people who have access to rotary offset printing presses who can print the same thing and create counterfeiting. This has been a problem throughout, all of history where there's money involved. Is the idea of first, the Romans did it with diluting the value of the coin with the metals, and then later on, of course, it got just diluted, with a printing press. And so much so that in 1865, that's when the Secret Service was created. And the Secret Service wasn't doing protective duty in 1865. That didn't come around until I think the 30s, the 1930s. It was to go after people that were counterfeiting, because counterfeiting was rampant all over the United States, or the newly formed or reformed, I guess, if you want to call it, United States, after April of 1865. So that was the problem with gold, and the currency whose name we don't say, solved that problem. And it solved it very eloquently by simply saying, well, okay, we'll just use a digital ledger as opposed to a hard ledger. And it's a digital ledger that anybody can audit anytime they want. That solves that problem. Now, part of the history also is, why did this become a thing? Like, where did this all come from? Well, it was a problem that's been around for a long time, but where did it first become really popular and become the juggernaut that it is today? Well, it happened after 2008. And what happened in 2008? We all remember that was when we were first acquainted with the idea, or popularized with the idea, of too big to fail. A bunch of bankers and a bunch of asset holders, in conjunction with a bunch of real estate appraisers, pushed values of real estate way beyond their utility, so far beyond utility. And why did they do that? Well, they did that because the banks have to make ever escalating increased amounts of loans, because banking done with honesty and with ethics, right, means that very few loans would ever be getting done, because you would only lend money to businesses that were genuinely profitable and you understood could actually make a profit. But there's no money in that because you would have very few customers. So banks make money by lending money, and they have to make, and when that happens, when they get into that churn and burn phase, that means that they have to make ever escalating amounts of loans. And when you do that, it turns it into effectively a Ponzi scheme, because now they've got investors to pay back, and they've got, or to give dividends to, and then they also have their depositors they've got to pay, along with all the regulations and everything else. So their balance sheets always have to show prices going up, or what are called nominal values going up. They have to show that. So that's what ended up happening. Well, this created what's called or in their terms, a liquidity trap, because now you created a huge bubble, And now if you offset, if you go to try and sell any of that, there's not enough buyers, corresponding buyers, to support any of the prices that you claim that on paper that this stuff was worth. Well, that's what happened to all of these banks. Now, the correct thing to do would have been to let them all fail, let all the bankruptcies go, and let the stock market tank, let it lose probably, 3/4 of its so-called nominal value, which it would, or more. That would be what you would do. But that's not popular, because then, a bunch of billionaires would have had to wait a couple of years before they bought a new yacht, and we just can't have that. So they bailed all of this out. That's what created the currency of whose name we don't say. And it's a currency, and it was purpose designed to get rid of fiat and debt-based currencies. This has never happened before, where a good money or a good currency is chased out of bad currency. And it still hasn't happened, which is why you're seeing these ridiculous valuations, to your point about, well, why is it it's 60,000 this day and it's 40,000 this day? It's all over the place. Yeah, that's because it's always priced in dollars. And keep in mind that all you can do is just make something that's legitimate look like a scam, like everything else, because especially if you have no actual mathematical argument against it. And they don't. And keep in mind that bankers and politicians are absolutely terrified of the idea of having a hard currency, that they can't just say, oh, there's an emergency, quick, print a bunch of money. Quick, print a bunch of money and send it to this country, that country, and then it comes back to us, through the whatever industrial complex. It doesn't make any difference anymore, because they're all an industrial complex, and they're all owned pretty much by the same folks who have bought them all up with counterfeit dollars. See, nobody really cares, for example. I mean, if you're stealing, as long as you're stealing dollars, because that gives, gives it value. Nobody, as long as people still accepting dollars, it has value. As soon as they stop accepting dollars, then it goes away very quickly. So now that we have a little bit of the history and foundation of this, you can understand why it is so hated and why there is so much propaganda pushed out there against it because of this. And of course, even I go against the so-called the currency community, where I point out that it is not just some asset, not just some vague asset out in cyberspace. No, it's supposed to be a currency. And it's supposed to directly compete against the United States dollar and collapse it. That's what it's supposed to do. And right along with all 67 other countries that are dollarized, and take those countries with it, along with the United States, along with every other currency right behind it that is complete garbage. And it's because the people who got hurt the most in 2008 were savers. Anybody who was saving, anybody who actually was trying to save money got wiped out. That's who their spending power got wiped out. That's why we're seeing today that a so-called Big Mac, I don't even know what we even call it that, has effectively, like wafer thin beef jerky in between these gigantic, these buns, and this ever shrinking package that costs, whatever it is, $12 now or $18 now. That's what causes this. It causes these problems. And this inflation aspect is caused by creating more dollars than there are goods and services to spend on. In other words, so too many dollars chasing too few goods and services, just like we're seeing in the stock market and other markets out there. There's too many dollars chasing too few profit opportunities. So as a result of that, that is what's caused all of this. That's why everything is a mess right now. So the currency of which we don't say their name, we don't say its name, seeks to solve that as a currency that doesn't require bankers. It doesn't require third parties. It doesn't require anybody to be a trusted third party, because there aren't any such thing. That's why it exists. I hope that somewhat answers the question, or at least, if nothing else, gets you curious enough to maybe go a little further and start asking a few other questions about it, because there is a lot there to unpack, but it's going to be most of it history. Once you understand the history of money, makes total sense.